got it started.
Great.
Same here.
Well, welcome everyone. I'm Eva DeGostini, and I have with me Martine Damaris and Catherine Korah, and we are the Center of Excellence for Behavior Management team. Very exciting, as we had mentioned as you came in, that so many of you were willing to join us at this late time of the year. We are going to be looking at 3 of the chapters of the book Reclaiming Our Students, a brand new book just hot off the press. We are just thrilled to share some of the material with you. We're trying out this format. It's similar to the Rest, Play, Grow book study format. So Catherine today will be the one who will be walking you through the content and elaborating also on the content of what you read in the chapter, and then relating it back to things that can be done in the classroom and with your students. Martine and I will be moderating or watching the chat for some questions, and we will take your questions at the end. Thank you to the person who did already send in a question. I believe that Catherine will address it as she speaks. So I think without further ado, Catherine, let's just start.
Wonderful. There was a question in the Q&A box asking if this is going to be recorded. So yes, it is going to be recorded, and we're going to post it on our YouTube channel. Okay, so I will share my screen. Alrighty, so I'm going to put this up. Okay. And so chapter 8 for Reclaiming Our Students. And so this chapter talks about the child who is anxious. Just to reiterate, for those who would like to have more information post this chapter, because there's so much information out there, we do have on our website a whole section where we've got different editorials that are available. We will be sharing with you after with the recording some editorials and some documents as a bonus in terms of application with your students in the classroom and just further reading. And so when we're talking about key insights, I always like to start my presentations with key insights, so you have an idea of where I'm coming from and where I'd like to go. Of course, when we're talking about alarm, and I'm purposefully using the word alarm, I know that Hannah in the book, Hannah and Tamara use the word anxiety, but there is a difference between the word anxiety and the word alarm. And the reason why we're using this term is because we wanted to normalize the emotion. And so anxiety, if we were to look at it as a continuum, alarm is the foundational emotion that we all have and that is normal. Anxiety would be at the other end of the continuum, where there's defenses that are there and that we're not truly seeing what it is that we're alarmed by. And so all this to say that we all have alarm to some level, and that it is completely normal, and that it is there to tell us something. And so, of course, if we're looking at the situation in the here and now, being in the pandemic, we probably are noticing much more in us and in our children and in students, the level of alarm through and through. And this is very normal and very understandable considering the situation. And so, of course, alarm has a job to do. It is very necessary, and it's there to protect us from danger. Some individuals are more at risk for developing anxiety problems. And so depending on their level of sensitivity, depending on if they've had difficult upbringing, traumas and things like that, that could make them more susceptible to defending and then having anxiety problems. In the classroom, it's not because you have anxious students that you necessarily pick up on those students who are anxious. Some of them it shows more than others. I would say some of them, the symptoms seem to be quite obvious, and others, the symptoms are actually quite quiet and don't disturb at all. And the other piece to keep in mind as well is that not everyone expresses their anxiety in the same way. Some of them may have anxiety that in the behavior and the acting out, it looks very different. And so you might see inattention, you might be silly, you might see silliness. I know Hannah in the chapter 8, she talks about that student who's being really silly when he's presenting, and so that would be a perfect example. Lashing out could also be another symptom that could be related to anxiety. It's not because we're seeing aggression that it's necessarily just frustration. Martine will talk more about that presentation in 2 weeks. But for now, we're focusing on anxiety and alarm. And the other piece that to me is the, one of the most fundamental key insights to hold on to is that we can't address anxiety and alarm directly at the symptoms. Is how can we take a step back and make more sense of it and understand it as an emotion? What's the nature of emotions? What are the laws around emotions? And how could we address it at the root? And so I was talking about the difference between alarm and anxiety. And so anxiety really being more in terms of the symptoms, and alarm really being at the foundation. And so the alarm is the primal emotion. It's what we all have in our system. And so if there's anything that happens that triggers us in a certain way where we feel unsafe, all of this can bring forth symptoms of alarm. It doesn't necessarily mean that we'll have anxiety per se. Anxiety would be at the other end of the continuum where there's more defendedness. And so to bring in a bit of the neuroscience to kind of explain a little bit how this works and to normalize that, to understand that alarm is all into the limbic system. And so understanding that the brain has different sections that have different purposes, the limbic system is the center for emotions. This is where emotions take place. And understanding that in the prefrontal cortex, where it might be more of the executive functioning, this is not where the alarm is triggered. It's in a more primitive, more primal portion of the brain. And so the sections that are at play here in the limbic system is the amygdala, which is kind of like a smoke detector. This is what registers the threat and then starts off the sequence. And the hypothalamus, works hand in hand with the amygdala, and this is what orchestrates the response. And then we have the sympathetic nervous system that is triggered, and so on. And so when we understand how that works, then we understand that we don't choose to feel a certain way. We don't choose to be afraid. We don't choose to be alarmed. It is something that happens to us. And actually, we might not even be aware that this is happening to us too. It might happen on a very unconscious level, where something, our brain's picked up on something that is feeling unsafe. And then all of the response then sequence itself from that. And so when our students in the classroom are having all sorts of emotions or all sorts of reactions, understanding that they're not doing this on purpose, they're not choosing to do this to make us feel bad, to make others feel bad. This is something that is happening to them that moves them whether they like it or not. And so understanding the, kind of using the analogy of the iceberg and understanding that emotions are really what is beneath. This is what's happening in our body, what's happening in our brain. And so having the adrenaline and the cortisol, and then of course the physiological response, so having the heart rate and the blood pressure, all of this is in the sympathetic nervous system that is being activated. And all of the alarm is what qualifies all of the chemistry and the physiological portion of the body. The feeling, which is different from the emotion, is us recognizing, oh my goodness, I'm scared right now. And so the feeling is the consciousness. The feeling is being in tune with our body and recognizing that something is happening to us. And so there's words that can come to that. And so again, many students in our classrooms could have emotions of alarm, but it doesn't mean that they're recognizing that and that they're in tune with themselves and are able to speak to it. And so there's a difference between emotion and feeling. And so, of course, the more that the child is activated, the more the child feels overwhelmed by this alarm and has the brain then that protects themselves from this overwhelming alarm that is too intense, then there might not be this connection or there's attunement to the feeling. And so this is why when there's more emotion and there's less feeling, where there might be, more difficulty for the person, whether it's a child or even an adult, we see this, oftentimes in adults too, where there's no tempering of that emotion. And so this is when you're going to start seeing all of the behaviors that are attached to that, whether it's the obsessions or the compulsions or the agitation or the hyperactivity. And so it's not that for an individual who is able to temper, it's not that the alarm disappears. It's not that the alarm's not there. It's how can the person who is experiencing the alarm be able to have enough separation from it that they're able to cope, and that would help them temper some of the extra. We're going to talk more about that further in this presentation today, but just the point of this slide is just to make the difference between emotion and feeling, and how oftentimes when we're seeing behavior issues with students, it's that there's more emotion and there's less feeling. And so what can we do to help them find their feelings back in order to be able to work through some of these emotions? And so what triggers emotional expression? When we understand attachment, we understand that attachment is the most preeminent need. And so because it's the most preeminent need, it also means that it's the biggest threat for all of us. And when we're talking about attachment, I don't mean attachment in the sense of Bowlby's attachment. We're going to look at that. But just so you know, there's so much research that has been made on this about the impact of separation, whether it's isolation, whether it's feeling lonely, whether and across the world, whether it's men or women or different ages. And so there has been support in terms of research that has shown how preeminent attachment is, and how much of a threat that is. And so when we understand the different levels of attachment, because it's not about being attached or not attached, it's not about being securely attached or insecurely attached, it's understanding the different ways that we attach to people and how fluid attachment can be, and how we can get very overwhelmed or very stressed out about threats that we pick up in our attachment relationships. And so if we feel that we don't belong, if we feel that we are different, that we're not normal, if we feel that we don't matter, that we're not cared for, or that we're not understood, these could be all different ways where we might feel threatened in our attachment. I won't go through all of this because there's a lot of information on this slide. So I'll give you yourselves the chance to take a look at it on your own. But just to pick up a few here, at each level of attachment, not being with, and so perhaps feeling rejected, or perhaps feeling like you're not being paid attention to, not belonging, feeling like you're not included. How often students, whether it's at recess they want to play, or it's at gym and they're the last one to be picked to be part of a team. These could be all examples of where they might feel threatened in their attachment, and how that might trigger the alarm. Feeling like they don't matter, their opinion, it doesn't matter, that they're not being taken care of, that they're not being truly seen or heard. And so these could be all different ways that they could feel threatened. Another thing to keep in mind too, where separation can create alarm, is all of these things. And all of these things can mean different things to different people. Going to school. For some students, they may love school and feel very safe there, more so than at home. But for other kids, school could be a very threatening environment. Divorce, adoption. Right now with COVID, thinking about, has there been loss? Has there been death? Feeling isolated at home. These could be all things that could be contributing to the alarm in the body. And so in terms of COVID, just to kind of dig a bit deeper there, when students will be heading back to school, some of you, you have students that are back in school, but for some of you who they only will be returning in the fall, it's not because they are returning in the fall that there would be less stress than the kids who have returned now. We don't know what state they're going to be in when they're going to be coming back in September. And there's a range of emotions that they might be feeling. And so having alarm, will I feel safe? Frustration, why can't I do this right now? Worry, how will I know what to do? Excitement, I'm looking forward to seeing my friends and my teachers. Disappointment, there was no graduation. Sadness, will things ever be the same? And so understanding that emotions don't work in isolation. Emotions can actually compound each other, and can have this effect on our system. And so this is all of and these are just examples. There could be so many others of what things could be going through our students' mind, and even us as adults. You know, I remember when we announced that we were going to open May 25th, you know, and I'm not even a teacher, I'm not even in the classroom, the stress that came over my body of thinking of just trying to set up to get ready for students. And so I can't imagine, you know, for you teachers who are in the classroom and support staff and you know, welcoming children live and children themselves, you know, going back to school, all of that. And so understanding a little more about, you know, how alarm works and in terms of emotions, what can we do as adults to help students cope? And so one quote that I really love is, beneath every behavior is a feeling, and beneath every feeling is a need. And when we meet that need, rather than focus on the behavior, we begin to deal with the cause and not the symptom. And so this is the point. How can we get a better sense of what's beneath that iceberg? And rather than addressing the, you know, all of the symptoms that are up there of the alarm, how about if we look at it more at a root level and trying to see what we can do there to best support our students? And so in having that in mind, the three things that I would say that all adults, whether it's the parent, whether it's the principal, the teacher, and so forth, what are the three things to focus on when we're looking at helping students cope? And so the first part is in terms of the way we see things. And so if we understand how emotions work, if we understand that alarm has a purpose, that alarm is not something that's going to disappear. We all have that in our system. That alarm is not something that we choose. Alarm happens to us, whether we like it or not, it moves us. And so if we understand it from that lens, then the way that we're going to react to it, and in turn, the way that we're going to respond to it, will be very, very different. And so it all starts from insight. How can we adjust our view? And so in turn, the second point is, how can we adjust our stance then? And so for us as adults, how can we make this very safe environment where we're not adding on to the alarm children are already facing? And so not compounding our own emotion to theirs, by our own alarm to their alarm, our frustration to their behavior, or disapproval of that. How could we help by normalizing the experiences that children are going through? And the third piece is, how could we make more room? And so making room for the emotion that comes up and the different types of expression and release. And I understand, you know, some teachers might say to me, this is great, you know, talking about making room for emotion, but how can I make room for emotion in a classroom when I've got 30 students or 20 or 30 students and I've got a curriculum to teach? And so how can we do this? And we are going to look at ways, we're going to look at application. Of course, it's not a perfect system and we do the best with what we can. But I don't believe that it's all or nothing. I think that there is room for possibilities here if we can think outside the box. And so when we think about what is needed, I wanted to give you guys this visual. I love the idea of the triangle and looking at the key elements around alarm. And so understanding that resilience is the piece that ties in hand, kind of like a puzzle, hand in hand with understanding how to address alarm. And so the idea of resilience is not that we're not having a hard time in hardship, is that even though we're having a hard time and we've got alarm that is being triggered by a situation that's difficult for us, we're able to bounce back from that situation. And so in order to bounce back, the three things as adults that we can help children work around or work with is emotional expression, the sense of safety, and the third one is courage. And so we're going to get into each and every one separately. Oh, and before I forget, the other piece too to keep in mind is that in addressing these three keys, it's also looking not just at the medium, it's also looking at in terms of the process and the context. And so if alarm can be addressed in the play mode, and it is also addressed in a safe relationship, this makes all the difference. Because for us as adults to tell children that it's up to them to self-regulate, that it's up to them to find the skills or to find the tools to do this on their own, how scary that is for them to believe that they're on their own to do this. And so for us to say, I'm here for you, and we're going to do this together, makes all the difference. The other piece too, in terms of the play, is that many children have a very hard time addressing these very vulnerable emotions on a very in a very raw, direct way. And so for many children, the way through is not necessarily to get them to plow through what is too difficult or too vulnerable, but rather trying to do it in a more indirect, safe mode. And so play is a wonderful avenue where children can address very difficult, different situations and whatnot, but one step removed where it feels safer to do so. And so children need an adult leading and guiding them. Children were not meant to take care of themselves. And so in terms of the relationship, in terms of the adult, going back to those 3 points where I said, the first point is about our lens, about the way we see things. The second one being about our stance, and the third one is about making room. And so keeping that in mind and us being that emotional coach. And so how can we as adults help them co-regulate? And so I love this word, rather than self-regulate, using the word co-regulate, where we're doing this together, where us as adults, we're there also to model. We're there to normalize and to validate all of these emotions, and to say to a child that, we're all afraid. And when we are able to work through something, when we have courage, and we're going to talk about courage in a few minutes from now, but courage is not being fearless. Courage is having the fear and yet still being able to take the risk to work it through. And so how can we as adults, model that and normalize and make room for that? And so this starts from us. And so if we're frazzled and we're destabilized by the child's alarm, how can we help them with their alarm if we're having a hard time with theirs or our own? And so I think that the coaching, yes, is with the child, but also with ourselves. I think it's important that there is self-reflection about seeing what are those things that trigger us as adults, and what are those things, that we're having a hard time coping through or adapting to, and doing that work on ourselves as well as adults. And so taking that lead, Hannah spoke about that in the chapter, upping our leadership, especially when a child is feeling unsafe. How can we be that very safe place for them? And so projecting that calm and that confidence. And by all means, it doesn't mean that we're truly calm and truly confident. It's all in the way that we show it. And so that's why I put it in capital: if necessary, fake it until you make it, right? It's not about truly having the lead or having all the answers. It's really about making as if we know where we're going. Kind of like, this reminds me of a little bit, when you're in the plane and you've got the hostess who's giving all of the directives, like when you're in a drill. And so it's supposed to be, it can be a very stressful situation, but the adult is just speaking as a matter of fact. And so making as if. And so one of the things to keep in mind is paying attention to our nonverbals and our body language, but also keeping in mind, how are we speaking to children? Are we speaking too much? Are we raising our tone? Is our voice too loud? And so especially for those students who are very sensitive and where their amygdala gets triggered very easily, just being really careful about the way that we address them and to not over-inundate their alarm system. And also to compensate if they're feeling unsafe and feel that things are unpredictable. And this, COVID is the perfect situation where we were trying to figure out how to make school safe in a situation where there are certain elements that are completely out of our control, right? And so it's about thinking as to where are those things that we can make things that are more predictable and more consistent. So thinking about rules, thinking about procedures, routines, and all of that. And so how us as adults were able to compensate for that and to create a safe environment for the child to feel safe, even if there are elements of that are not safe. And so being that traffic director. And so play, I was talking about play earlier, and the benefits of play, and understanding that play is a practice for the brain, where we can practice where it's not for real, there's no true repercussions, and we're able to try out certain things and to take risks. And so it allows for the brain to try out emotional regulation and all of that, and to feel safe in the conditions. And so what play has to offer is a free space that is free from work. And so the child doesn't feel that there's outcomes. You know, if we're going to be trying out a very alarming situation, it's not to please the adult. It's not because we're trying to get some sort of outcome or some sort of result. It's about us trying it out for the sake of trying it out and exploring it. And it's a protection for feelings because, again, there's no true repercussions. It's not for real. We're pretending, right? We could even pretend to be another character. We don't have to be ourselves in a very real situation that's too close to home. We could make it really 1 or 2 steps removed, where even using puppets or something like that, where it seems so much less scary. We had a question of someone, and I'll address it a bit later, but talking about presentations and how people get stressed out about presenting. And an idea I could just throw out really quickly, and we could address it a bit more afterwards, is using play. How could we use play to address something as scary as presenting? Where perhaps we could pretend through play, let's say with puppets, or being a different character, through drama, through theater, and so allowing for the child, exactly, that's in, and so just being really silly, right, and trying out different hats and having different characters where we can try out, presenting, but then it's not as scary because it's not for real. I'm not being graded, or kids are not going to tease me because I'm being a different character and it's for fun. And so looking at the element of safety. And so how can we help students feel safe enough? And so understanding, in terms of us as adults that are there to coach them through to make them feel safe. And so it's through our warm presence and our trusting presence that in the relationship we can help them feel at rest. But it's also in the environment. How could we set up an environment where they could feel safe and that it helps them experience well-being? And then of course in the play mode if necessary, whether it's pretending or imagining. And so having emotion at play. But understanding that even though we as adults think that what we're doing is safe, or that the environment that we've set up for the child is safe, it doesn't mean that the child feels safe. It's how the child interprets that. Safety is in the eye of the beholder. It's a very subjective experience. And so being empathetic to the child, that even though we're trying things to make them feel safe with the relationship or with the environment, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to translate. And so to keep that in mind. And so, thinking about our everyday practices, the greeting, every morning, starting off on the right foot, and the 2 examples that I put up here are COVID safe greetings. I have to tell you, it was so hard for me to find pictures where I could find the student-teacher relationship where the teacher was not physically close to the child or touching, the hand on the shoulder or something. And so we have to recreate all of these rituals in our relationships, and in order for the child to feel safe and for us, for them to feel close to us, and yet still have that physical or social distancing, right? But we can do it. There's other ways around it where we can create those conditions. Talking about check-ins, and so seeing with the child, especially those that we see oftentimes chronically, are struggling with all sorts of things, having that regular connect where we can show to the child that we have genuine interest in them and into their well-being, checking how their evening went, seeing, so what's the schedule for today, showing the predictability of the day, telling them that we're there for them if they need anything, encouraging them, and all of that. And this doesn't need to take very long, and the other piece too is check-in doesn't necessarily mean the very long conversation. A check-in could also just be, a very warm smile where there's a few words that are exchanged, and that we can recheck in later in that day. And so, the more that we can do this, whether it's the morning greeting, whether it's a daily check-in, the more that children feel connected. I think the piece that we need to understand, especially in the COVID situation, is that it's not the environment itself that children feel unsafe with. It's the relationship with the adults. And so if they're feeling safe with the adults, if they think they know where the adults are going, and that the adults are very present, very stable, taking the lead, and telling them what they need to do and where to go, even though there are dangers of COVID itself, children will feel safe because they will feel at home with us. And so having the greeting, having the check-in is there in order to just keep them in that mode. And so the other piece too, in terms of environment, this is a project that the Center of Excellence has put together over the last 2-3 years, where creating safe places in a school for students, a place where they can go if classroom is not the place where they can be right now because they can't function, even if it's for a short little while to take a break. It doesn't have to be for a longer period in the day, to establish a place. And so, and that this place has been thought through in terms of materials, in terms of approach, in terms of intervention, and all of that. And like this picture looks really pretty with all of the setup. It doesn't need to be this pretty or this detailed in terms of setup. Of course, it's about the rapport with the child and the adult, but in terms of having materials at arm's reach, where when the child comes in and we're working with them, that we have things that you can very quickly pick up and then work on with, whether it's working on a puzzle, or it's to write out things that we're feeling, or it's reading a book or whatever. And so here's another example of another room that we've put together working with schools. And different sections have different purposes. And so for students who are easily alarmed to the point where it affects their functioning in the classroom, a place like this would be really key for a student like that, where whether it's to start off the day, that they need the check-in here to start off the day, or that they need a break from the class because either it's the subject area that is too difficult, or there's a substitute teacher and it's too much, or whichever specific situation to that child, that they can go here and either have a one-on-one with an adult, or they can have private time to work on certain things, or have bubble time where they can be in the tent or whatnot, whatever it is that they need. And so creating that environment with many, many different types of intervention and types of materials, so we can cater to different students and different needs. And so the sense of safety has much less to do with the surroundings and more to do with the connection to the adults. That's what I was talking about before. And so a child doesn't feel lost when they're with the adults, and the adults show up for them and take the lead. And so how can we as adults find ways to increase their sense of safety? I've put down here some examples. We have additional materials that we'd like to share with you guys that goes more in depth for these. But just us as adults being really playful. As much as COVID has been really stressful for all of us, and it still is, and it still will be, even in September when we come back to school, for those of us who have not come back to school just yet, it's going to be our default to be stressed ourselves, right? And we're going to need to catch ourselves. And being careful in our body language, and being careful in our tone, that if a child comes too close to us, or that children come too close to each other because of physical distancing, to be careful but being more playful and addressing safety issues in more of a, like trying to address like in a drill, right? It's more of a matter of fact than being freaked out because the child is doing something that seems dangerous. And then looking at what would be the same. And so for a child coming back to school in a situation where there's social distancing, what would be the same and what would be different? And so sometimes comparing what would be the same and what would be different can help put that alarm at ease, because we have a better sense of what's to come. And then also playing physical distancing games, where rather than being very firm and very how can I say this, like it's a job that we have to do. How about making it playful, where we could play at physical distancing and then help the child come along with that? And so here are perfect examples of play. The picture on the left of the adult with the hockey stick. Us Canadians with our hockey, and just utilizing this great tool with the little dog at the end, right? And so the teacher is walking her dog, and she probably is saying to students, watch out, I'm walking my dog. You can't be too close to me because I don't have space to walk my dog. And so how to make it, more playful. Martin had this other great idea that had come up in conversation, talking about going fishing and having the what's the term? The Metzen help me here. The fishing hook, not the fishing hook.
Having the pool noodle, using the pool noodle
Yes,
fishing rod with a fish that you've decorated that is hanging. Excuse me, I've got my fish. I don't want to drip on you.
exactly. Thank you.
Fisherman hat on.
And the picture on the right, you know, like here's another example of how we could be very playful and using the hat with the balloon. And so that gives us the distance, right, for social distancing. But it's not about you know, saying kids, oh my goodness, like you're too close. It's about trying to find a way for them to visually see what the distance is and making it playful.
Catherine, one of the participants said they go beep, beep, and then everybody has to back up and the kids all giggle.
I love it. Yeah. And of course, I'm giving very COVID specific examples because that's our reality right now. But, you know, stepping away, you know, because eventually we're hoping we're going to move away from COVID at some point. You know, how could we use this situation with COVID as an inspiration to then later, you know, be able to put in place other approaches and other materials and other interventions where we could be equally playful for everyday situations at school. Emotional expression. And so how can we provide opportunities for emotional expression when a student is up against what they cannot change? And so, of course, the emotional expression, I was talking about co-regulation before, right? And so with the adult who is present with their warmth and their comfort and inviting for the child to express, you know, how often we're very quick to wanting the child to move to calm or to be happy, and we want to fix it, we want to make it better. And if we understand how emotions work, it's not about cutting it out. It's about making room for it. Remember, I was talking about, you know, our view, our stance, and then making room. And so making room for emotional expression, letting them say how it is that they feel, or write, or draw, whatever it is. And for those for whom it is way too vulnerable, again, the one step removed through play mode, whether it's the drawing, the drama, the dance, the singing, the music, you know, different ways that we can do this. You know, even going back to COVID and the different situations, washing the hands, excuse me, washing the hands, using songs, right? We're using chants. And so how can we, in the play mode, be able to address very stressful situations? And it's one step removed. And moving away from the right thinking mode. And so thinking that, you know, we need to pursue happiness and for children not to be sad, resisting the letdown, and pursuing calmness and tranquility. You know, if you notice on this picture, the character is trying to go up backwards. And so we're going upstream, we're going in the wrong direction. Emotions have movement and need to do their wave. And so how could we respect nature and go with it rather than go resist it and go backwards, and allowing for emotions to run their course. And it's the same thing with alarm, all emotions, in fact, sadness, you know, and all of frustration. And so that's it, you know, it's inviting the emotion and letting it work its way through. And so coming alongside, what does that mean to come alongside a person's feelings? And so accept the fact that they exist whether we want it or not. And of course, they're not rational and they're not reasonable. And so to anticipate that and to make room for that, to normalize it, and not to try to just get rid of it. And so here are examples of ways sometimes adults invalidate and dismiss emotions. And it's not that we purposefully do this. Of course, we have good intentions. But we don't realize that sometimes in the way we address things, indeed, we're invalidating and dismissing. And so saying things like, don't be silly, there's nothing to be scared of. Why are you afraid of that? You see, everything turned out fine, all of that worrying for nothing. And so instead of saying things like this, to really be empathetic and to acknowledge. And so saying things like, wow, that was really scary. You looked a little frightened. Would you like to hold my hand? Everyone gets scared at times, even grown-ups. Yes, even me. Even though everything worked out, I know you were really worried. And so it's not because we acknowledge the emotions that it means that the child will be more afraid. I think sometimes as adults, we're afraid that if we make room for those very noisy emotions like alarm, like frustration, like, you know, and all of that, that if we make room for it, that it's going to take more space and it's going to be even louder or more noisy. And it's actually the opposite. You know, emotions are very much like electricity. where we get charged by situations. And if we can allow for the discharge, if we could allow for there to be the expression and the release, that we're actually going to feel better, first of all, and relieved. But also, once the discharge is done, the system then is in a better place, and so it doesn't mean that the child will be more alarmed or more sad or deeper or more noisy. And so, understanding how emotions work and the nature of that. And so being careful, there's such a misconception I find about resilience and about thinking that strength is healthy. And when I mean strength, I mean like the very solid, silent strength, where the child doesn't seem affected and seem very calm and collected. And it's not natural. Many, and even us as adults, emotions are noisy. Emotions are messy. They take place and expression, it takes a lot of room. And so when a child is expressing fears, it's actually quite healthy. And I always say, be I don't know what the expression is in English, but like, se méfier de l'eau morte, being careful that when a child is quiet, when a child is very too collected, too cool and collected, that there's perhaps something to worry about behind that there. Maybe there's defenses, and that the child's not really truly feeling their emotions and working them through. And so what could be emotional playgrounds to be able to invite the emotional expression? And so laughter and humor, drawing and painting, drama and theater, dance, movement, singing, music, irony and wordplay, stories and writing, teasing and silliness. And please, keep in mind, this could be done at any age, whether it's elementary, high school, even adults, wordplay and things like that. These are things that can be employed at any age. And so also, I wanted to share with you guys, we'll send you the link. I have it here on the slide down there. This is a document that our colleague Hannah Beach put together, which is 3 activities that teachers in a classroom can do with their students, and they're COVID friendly, which is great, to be able to express emotion and to bring it out there, whether it's through music or whether it's through rhythm or through doodling. And just so you know, for above and beyond the book that Hannah and Tamara wrote, they also put together a handout with a bunch of different activities. And so it's a great handout. And that will be available for those who are getting the book. That handout is available as well. And so again, just putting images out there, talking to inspire, ways to express, to release, whether it's through conversation, but it doesn't have to be conversation, whether it's through writing, through walking in nature and listening to music, through painting, for older, photography, playing music, poetry, and all of that. There's so many different ways. And as soon as we understand, that this is the way through, being creative and thinking outside the box, you teachers are way better than I am at this, is being creative and bringing forth ideas on how to allow for emotions to express themselves in a very, artistic or very musical or whatnot kind of way, and so that's it. There's so many examples. What could be other tools also that we could use? Sensory materials, whether it's movement, for example, different dance poses, yoga, with little ones using animal poses or animal walks. With music, whether it's rhythm, with drumming, sometimes helping with the rhythm, talking about emotions that have their wave, right? And so using music, and rhythm to be able to mimic the emotion and the movement and the wave, right? The scribbling, the doodling, building and creating. We've got tons and tons of material to inspire you guys. We've got some on our website about helping to build and create things with students. Play, drama, dress up, having a cocoon area. If the child is requesting for playtime, not playtime, sorry, for bubble time, I meant, in the classroom too, it could be alternative seating or workstations that could help with reducing some of the extra alarm. And so in books too, books is another great way. You know, as a teacher, when we have a section when we're reading with students, taking out a book where we could talk about emotions and normalizing that and naming different types of emotions. And you know, just making space for that where students and adults could share examples, you know, along with the story. And the third piece, the courage. And so how could we help a student feel strong and confident enough? And so by normalizing the alarm, remember I was saying earlier, it's not about for the child to be fearless. It's about having the fear and yet still take the risk. And so having a belief in our capacity, but for the adults to also have the belief in the child's capacity, and for them to discover themselves and to explore and to be able to discover that their own courage. And the same thing in the play mode. You know, and this is a great analogy talking about courage, you know, where on the one hand we could have the fear of the dragon. How many examples, you know, like even in Hannah's chapter where she talked about presenting, you know, how many children have a fear of presenting? And so the dragon would be the fear of presenting, but the treasure would be, you know, all of the great ideas that I want to share and that I'd be missing out on sharing because I can't present them. And so being able to have perspective and to be able to, on the one hand, have the fear, but on the other hand, also seeing the desire and seeing what it is that we're missing out on, and to be able to bring them together to give us enough courage to work it through. And so these are many examples, right? You know, the fear, for example, of meeting disapproval, but on the other hand, the desire to want to express her opinion. You know, the fear of not measuring up, but then if you always don't just take risks, then how can you pursue your passions, and all of that, and so on. And so playing through the fear and discovering our courage, whether it's through dress up and masks and risk take play, being the superhero, taming the monster, being the monster. You know, how many different ways can we work through the fear, and play is a wonderful avenue. And so I was talking about Hannah and Tamara's Inside Out handbook. I just put an image up here just to remind you guys. On their website, you'll see there's a portion there for their book, but there's also a section with a code from the book where you could go and get yourself a copy of the handout, where there's tons of activities around art and music and play and all of that, which is really wonderful. And the same thing, you know, we've got tons of editorials. We will send with the recording more links, so you will have all of that. I wanted to make sure, I think we've got a couple minutes where we can share. I'm going to stop sharing now, where we could look at, you know, some questions. I'm sure that there's some questions that came up. I had one that came online through email. I just want to take a moment to answer it. And so the question was, Jamal is a class clown to release his anxiety. Jamal is in the chapter 8 where we talk about Jamal who's just being the class clown. And so this person is asking, would this affect our attachment and make future attempts to do public speaking harder for him if we were to address it, him being the class clown? And because he was releasing his anxiety to complete the tasks, and we corrected him in front of the class by saying that's not what we had in mind. And so I think that there's two things that I want to say to this. And the second question that this person has is somewhat related. They were talking about public speaking, and about, you know, how it's a double whammy because it's scary to present in public, and then also you've got your peers that are there and you're afraid of judgment. And so how to help. And so a few things that I can say. I think the first thing is, for Jamal anyway, I would not be addressing Jamal in front of the group in terms of the silliness. I would absolutely take him aside and talk about the silliness. But I think more than that, rather than putting the focus on the silliness or the behavior itself, I think shifting your lens, it's more talking about what it is that made that he was silly in the first place. He was afraid of presenting. And so talking about that fear of presenting and normalizing that and making room for that and letting him talk about that if he can, and maybe perhaps you as a teacher sharing with him too, that maybe yourself as well, you may have had your own fears of presenting when you were younger or even now. And And so I think that by making room for it and for him to feel like it's okay to feel like that, it might help him to be more open to look at other ways to deal with his fear than focusing just on the silliness. The other piece too, I think, to keep in mind is that, and Jamal's not the only one, many students have a very hard time public speaking. And so to offer them other avenues, maybe, we could do a practice run with a smaller group, or maybe the student could do a one-on-one with the teacher where he could do a first, if he can't do it at home with mom and dad, that maybe the practice run could be done at school with the teacher in privacy. And so being able to discover himself, I think the other piece out of that too is, in order to feel better about yourself presenting, it's not about telling yourself to cut it out. We're always going to be stressed presenting. I think it's about trying to find a way to find your courage, right? It's to find a way to work it through. I know for me, I was super shy as a child, and I was petrified to present for the longest time. And the piece that helped me out, that helped me through, is in university, I did a presentation where I was filmed, and I got to see myself present. And I realized that the way I look to others and the way I present is not the same that how I feel it in me. And so it made me feel better about myself, and it gave me the courage to continue to present. And so how can we help students to discover themselves, to help them work it through, to help realize they can survive this, even though it's difficult and it hurts, and that we're so shy and so stressed out about it, that we're okay, that we've made it on the other end.
I think, and I think that's just it, taking it, and we haven't really talked that much about development too. Grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, grade 4. For some, it's not until they get to high school that they feel that they can actually manage the temper the alarm with the desire. And I guess all of you have found ways to help those children who are immobilized by it. And realizing that if we just give them some way of it not being an all or nothing in terms of the presentation, but finding other ways. And Martine, you had a great idea too.
Well, I think part of it is also working it in stages. But I've seen, for a teacher who, for a student who was very shy, had a very timid voice, was that, she gave out different options of how they could present, and he had chosen to do it with a puppet. So he was kneeling behind a desk, and the puppet was actually doing the presentation. But it was really interesting how he had a big voice and lots of intonation, and it was like, oh, but it was soon as the presentation was finished, he was, the timidity came back. But then it was like, you could see the pride of like, I did it, I got to the other side. And it was also that offering a choice, a support, and it was, and everybody was supported in whichever format way they took. But a very, a lot of normalizing that, we feel normal, we feel anxious, we feel alarmed, and that we can work through it,
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you so much, Catherine. You've covered an incredible amount of material very efficiently. Yes, yes. We do have a couple of other questions as well. One person just asked, well, how can we come alongside? I'm hoping that the question was answered. It came sort of earlier part, so hopefully this person has found some things from what you've presented. Somebody also said, well, what about children who've experienced past trauma?
Yeah, I mean, of course, having past trauma would mean that the amygdala probably would be more easily triggered, right? And so situations that may happen to them that for us seem almost random might somehow trigger something in them. And so I think the first part is understanding that of course there's such a continuum in children, whether it's their high sensitivity, whether it's the how some children easily defend to vulnerability, and it's also the trauma that might have, the trigger is more is done more faster or more intensely too. It's not just more easily, and so keeping that in mind, I think, is one thing. This goes back to my point, right, about the sense of safety is in the eye of the beholder, and so it's not because we think that it should be safe for the child that they feel safe. And I would say to tread lightly. It's about building that rapport, and for them to be able to trust us and to be able to depend on us. And it's a work in progress, you know. Of course, with children like that, it doesn't mean that we are seeing successes, and for things to seem to be moving ahead, that they will not ever have again, right? All of these reactions. I think that this is something that is long term, and so expecting that there may be some regression, that there may be situations for whatever reason that triggers them more deeply, and just being there for them, and
I've had the
making room,
analogy,
right? Making
Catherine, with
room.
a student, as you're saying, is where we kind of felt where the teacher had said to me, where I thought we had made progress, like, how come we're back at this? And I said, you know what, we need to see this a little bit like the duck dance, where we make some steps forward, whoop, there's an event. Sometimes we didn't tune into it, we didn't pick up to it, you know, like didn't realize it. But for this student, it has pulled them back.
Mm-hmm.
And what we need to is to be there behind them so that they can lean on, they can feel the support. And when they're ready, they will leap forward again. So it's a duck dance. The progress is being made over time, but it doesn't mean that we're always in a forward position. And at the same time, the steps back need to not be seen as regression or that we've lost the headway we had made, but that there's an event, there's a high sensitivity, something has been triggered, and that feeling, that reassurance will give them that leap forward that they need again. And it's interesting how some kids, when they leap forward again, they even do a little bit of turn of the head to see if the adult is there. Like, are you still there? Like, it's okay, I can go. And they need that reassurance. And some will need it more than others. But the more that they feel it, and that we build that safety net with different adults that are involved with them, that they can feel that, then they will find their courage to leap forward in different situations. But I think the duck dance analogy can be a good one to keep in mind, where it's not that a step back is a loss of progress. It's just, it's a momentary, you know, I got triggered and I need that safety, and then to be able to move forward again. Yeah.
And you know, the other piece too is, in terms of those children who have gone through trauma, you know, we won't ever know, because we're not in their shoes, you know, what kind of experience they've gone through. And so for a child who has gotten burnt before in a rapport with an adult, and that we're trying to make headway with the child, and we're trying to work on the relationship, for some kids, they at the get-go might be super open, and it seems like the relationship is going well. And as it gets deeper and closer in relationship, then all of a sudden the child backs off. And then we get shocked, because we don't understand, like, what happened here? What, did I do something wrong, or is there something wrong with the child? And we don't realize that they've gotten burnt so many times that they have a hard time trusting. And so when the relationship is very superficial, it doesn't hurt as much. But when the adult is, you know, we're more attached, and that the child is more afraid now of losing you because it means more and it might hurt more, then of course, like, they have this very, you know, jerk reaction to back off. And so that's something to keep in mind too, in terms of children with trauma.
Well, we are just about at the end
I
of our
know.
time. And as you all can tell, between the three of us, we could probably fill up another couple of hours very easily just on this topic. Next week, we'll be looking at chapter 11, which is a chapter on the child who is resistant. And you guys all got a bonus chapter in there with your PDFs. Somehow chapter 10 snuck in. So we won't be doing chapter 10. We will be doing chapter 11. Again, if you have a question prior to, it's very helpful, because it can help us to prepare for answering your questions. And I'm sorry if we missed anyone's question or comment, but we just do want to respect the time. So if you do have something, just write to us. Again, visit our website, take a look at it. There's lots and lots of material there, all in all different kinds of formats as well, which will help to flesh out what it is that Hannah and Tamara are sharing in their book, and what we at the Center of Excellence also wish to share with you, which is a developmental approach, a gentle approach that looks at emotions and development, and also understanding that right now all of you are, and all of us are, in a heightened sense of alarm because of COVID, and just want to thank all of you for the incredible work that you are doing with children. You are reassuring them, you are reassuring their parents, and we will get through this time. And what's really interesting is that we might have to catch up on some academics, but if we can keep everyone calm, we can get through the academics. And so I just thank all of you for everything that you're doing. And we look forward to seeing you. We had 102 people that I noticed. I don't know if there were more. We had 102 people today. We will send out the copy of the recording. We'll send out the articles that Catherine mentioned, and we will be, yes, just letting you know again, we'll send you the brand new Zoom link next week. So thank you very much, everyone. Truly, truly appreciate your support and
It's a pleasure.
participation.
We had a question about the book and whether the book would be available through the Center of Excellence. Please know that we're offering the selected chapters for this book study. We cannot provide the full book. And so for those who would like the full book, unfortunately, it's up to you to get it on your own. It's available online, but you do have those 3 chapters for the book study. So thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Have a great week. See you.